welcome to Legacy IAS. So this is a video on assumption based question. Many people face problems in this type. Okay, so we will be understanding what should be the process of attempting assumption based questions. Then I have taken two questions from 2024 that also we will be solving right here. Now let's get started. So first thing is basically assumption based question. You must know by now that what it is asking. They will say that which of the following assumptions are true according to the passage or true according to the author, correct? Both mean almost the same thing. Now how do you solve this? The problem is that assumption are not directly found in the passage. So what happens? They are line by line not found in the passage, and the other thing is that they are not crux of the passage, that you just get a gist of it, that this is given in the passage and then you go and mark it like you do in main idea or crux based questions. What is the message given by the passage? The problem here is basically they are based on some specific part of the passage and not explicitly. So you have to mostly find the basis here. So that becomes difficult. Now what should be the process? The process is fairly simple. First you should read RCs in this. You read the RCs and you mark the keywords. Now when I say marking the keywords, you can use any way of marking. What I use is basically if there is any noun, correct, because noun is defining something, correct. So if there is any noun, I will circle it. If there is any adjective or verb, I will underline it. So that if once we have done this practice, you will see that just by seeing all those rounds, and the underlines is just for you to see it again when you see the question, but just by those words that you have already put a round on them, you will be able to dissect that what might be the complete story in the passage. That will also help you when you are doing crux based questions. So what happens, what UPSC is usually doing, they are giving two questions. One is assumption based or some other type, and the other is usually based on what is the crux of the passage, what is given in the passage, sort of, correct. So for that question also this helps a lot. So this is a good practice that you adopt. Then after this, what you do, now you see the statements, that which of the following assumptions are true, whatever is the question, you see the statements. Now very important step is basically to consider as an assumption correct only if it has a basis in the RC. Now the basis rarely will be explicit. If it is explicit, nothing like it, correct. Some sentence is given in the passage, similar sentence just in simpler words or more difficult words is given in the statement, then it is of course easy. Now in most of the cases it will be given implicitly, that is not specifically those same words are mentioned, but implicitly by some parts of the passage you can understand that the author is trying to say this statement also which is given in the question. So that implicit or explicit connect you must make with the RC. Then only you should be marking that statement or assumption as correct or incorrect. If you don't find the basis, that is not the correct assumption. Even though the passage gives you a feel, okay, and you have understood the author very well, you already know this topic, all these are your preconceived notions, are of no use except for getting you an incorrect answer. So you must find a basis in the RC. Then at last what you do, you mark your answer. Now a few more things that we have already done, like obtain number of times in RCs is basically this ego, correct. So you have to use your ego. So basically what is ego? So extreme, usually the extreme words, okay, they can be removed. Then the overt generalization like all men are not good, okay. So these generalizations based on something, that is also usually wrong. And O is opposite to GS knowledge. So if something is completely opposite to GS knowledge, that also tends to be wrong. But in assumption, this is not the final call. This will just help you in elimination, okay. Otherwise the final call is always based on is there a basis in the RC or not. But this will help you in eliminating the options quicker. That is the only rule of ego in assumption based questions. Now let's get started. We have started. Let's do a question. Okay, you can pause and try yourself. or anyway I'll be solving it. Now, see, it says when a child reaches adolescence. Okay, so adolescence is seeming like a important word, correct? And it's a noun. So when a child reaches adolescence, there is an apt to be a conflict. Okay, there is a conflict between what? Between the parents and the child. So this is just describing the conflict, correct? So this we can just underline. So adolescence, in adolescence there is a conflict. Then since the latter means in this case the child, parent and child. So since the latter means what? The child considers himself to be by now capable of managing his own affairs. So the child feels this. Then while the former, that is the parents, are filled with parental solicitude. Okay, so the child thinks that I can decide for myself, while the parents are filled with parental solicitude. Then which is often a disguise. Okay, disguise for love of power, not power of love, not a power of love. This is saying love of power. Even if you believe in some other thing, you respect your parents and you follow everything, all that is fine, but the passage is saying what? That this parental solicitude, okay, that is being shown is actually what? It is actually a disguise. Disguise means it looks like something else, but it is what in actuality? It is love of power, that they like that power, that when you were a very small child, like you were just born 1 year, 2 year old, then they used to control everything in your life. When you will take bath, to when you will eat, when you will sleep, everything, correct? So that is what? That is the kind of power they had on your lives. Now suddenly that power keeps on losing as you grow. So that many parents are not very ready to lose. That is the thing it is talking about. Okay, then parents consider usually that various moral problems which arise in adolescence are peculiarly their province. Again, can you see what he's saying? That parents think that everything that is wrong in the adolescence has to be dealt with them, correct? So they must be dealing with it. Then the options they express, who expresses? Parents, however, are so dogmatic. Okay, dogmatic. Now if you know dogmatic, it's fine. So dogmatic means what? Backward looking. Okay, so basically not so dynamic in nature, just very traditional. Those are called dogmatic. So however, the options they express are so dogmatic that the young seldom confide. Okay, seldom confide in them. Okay, and usually go their own ways in secret. Now understand this. So what it is saying? It is saying that the young seldom confides in it. Basically what happens? Because they talk about something that is so outdated, that's why the young people, they rarely really confide in them. That is, they really abide by it. And what they do? They don't say anything, or they don't do some extravagant thing, but they go their own way in secret. So when mother is saying that you do like this, the child would say yes, and then he will do something else in secret. That is without telling her, correct? That is why most people lie to their parents. Okay, this is the passage. Now based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Now see all these round structures, you will see, you can recall the entire passage. And in adolescence there is some conflict between parents and child, because child thinks that he can decide on its own, while parents have parental solicitude, which is actually a disguise for love of power. They consider everything that he has to do is their province, correct? That is why, but their ways are so dogmatic, outdated, that's why the child does not usually do it, but they will just silently go their own way. Understood? Now based on the above passage, following assumptions have been made. So the adolescent does not feel comfortable with his parents because they tend to be dominating and assertive. Is this correct? Correct? Yes. Disguise for love of power, province, consider their own province, correct? So this has a basis in the passage, this part. This is correct. Then the adolescent of modern times does not have much respect for parents. What do you think? Now many people actually mark this as correct. Why? Because the notions in their mind are so strong that if you are not listening or if you are not following your parents word by word, that is disrespect. That is not disrespect, that is taking agency of your own life. When it is disrespect, when they start fighting with their parents, when they start shouting, when they create ruckus in the house, that is disrespect. What it says? That they go their own way in secret. So they are not disrespecting, they are just choosing to decide for themselves. So this is actually wrong. Okay, the passage is not really, and if you want to see it in more way, do you think in this entire passage who is being criticized? The parents or the child? Don't you think that the parent is being criticized here? So why would something like this will be correct? Correct. So that way also you can eliminate it. Answer becomes 1 only. Now let's do one more. Okay. Now this is a little longer. Let's see. You can pause and try. Conventional classrooms by emphasizing. Okay. So first is conventional classroom. By emphasizing fixed duration over learning effectiveness. Okay. Fixed duration over learning effectiveness, resign themselves to variable outcomes. Okay, conventional classrooms are about fixed duration rather than learning effectiveness. Okay, the tyranny of the classroom is that every learner is subjected to same set of lectures in the same way for the same duration. Correct? While every learner is different, they are at different points of their learning. Correct? So they should not be treated like we do in a conventional classroom. Then in the end, a very few learners shine and some survive, okay, and the rest are left behind. Correct? Then after the fixed duration, the classroom model moves on with not a thought spared for those left behind. Correct? So what happens? Once the class is done, then the teacher has to move forward, take the next lecture. This is the classroom, conventional classroom that we have, unfortunately. Then this is how we end up with 10% employability in our graduates after a decade and half of formal education. That is how you get our demographic at a 10% employability after having 15 years of formal education. Okay, repeating the same ineffectual script in the realm of skill education will not produce different results. Now it says that if we do the same thing in skill development or skill education, we will get the same result. It will not lead to any different result. Again, what will happen? Some will thrive, some will do good, okay, and those will be very few. Other people will just somehow survive. Most people will be left behind, like they are left behind in conventional classrooms. So this is what it is saying. Now, based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Okay. Now, if you just see the rounds, you can make some sense of it. Conventional classroom, fixed duration, learning effectiveness is not important. Same set of lectures is given to everybody. Most people are left behind. That is why we have low employability. If we do the same thing in skill education, we will have same result there also. Can you see how just by some rounds I am able to summarize it immediately? Correct? That is what you need to do. Now, let's read this. Based on the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Now, first, as a large number of workers in our country are employed in unorganized sector, okay, this is true, though not mentioned but true. India does not need to change its present conventional classroom system of education. Of course, this is wrong. First of all, this is extreme. India does not need to change anything. We are the best. We have figured out everything. Also, this entire passage is criticizing conventional classroom based system. Correct? So this is wrong. Then even with its present conventional classroom system, okay, of education, India produces sufficient number of skilled workers to fully realize the benefits of demographic dividend. Of course, we are not realizing the demographic dividend fully, and India produces sufficient skilled workers. No, we have a dearth of it. Correct? Only 10% is the employability rate. Of course, this is wrong. So both of these assumptions are wrong. Which of the following assumptions are valid? Neither. Okay. Now, can you see that while the passage was difficult, okay, you should not have left it. The passage seems little longer also, every way difficult, but if you see the statements, this was much easy. Why? Because here you had some extreme words, so you could eliminate it directly. That is why I always say that a question is difficult or easy is decided by these statements, not by the RC. This RC looked much easier, correct, but the statements were little trickier. Here the statements were very simple, and that is why you could get to the answer. In fact, I can show you passages in some other video. I will show you from 2025 where you would find that you can't even understand the passage fully, even if you know things, even if you know a lot of things, but then also you can get to the answer. So that also we will see some other day. That's it for assumption based questions. I hope you understood something about it. Try to apply this again and again in more and more PYQs. You will start making sense of how to do them. That's it. Thank you.